Good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. This is a really exciting hearing. I call the committee to order and welcome everyone to hear from professional athletes who are advocating for climate action. As this committee was envisioned, it was envisioned in large part as a forum for highlighting the experiences of diverse groups at the front lines of the climate crisis. And traditionally, when we think about climate activists, we might think about conservationists, we might think about people who have dedicated their lives to protecting the environment, or we might think about people who live along the coasts. But the truth is that climate change is impacting everyone. It's hurting every community and every industry, including the outdoor recreation industry and the often small rural towns that it supports. The fourth National Climate Assessment found that, quote, increasing air temperatures have substantially reduced the fraction of winter precipitation falling as snow, particularly over the western United States. And recent research suggests that the U.S. snow season has shortened by 34 days since the 1980s. As our winters shorten and snowfall continues to decrease, the United States' $20 billion snow sports tourism industry faces an uncertain future. That is a sobering prospect for an industry that contributes nearly 200,000 jobs and $7 billion in wages to our economy. Season lengths at ski areas are projected to decline by more than 50% by 2050 at some locations. One study found that only half of the ski resorts in the Northeast United States will be economically viable by that point. But for mountain communities across the United States and the world-class athletes who have dedicated their lives to outdoor sports, the financial figures don't fully capture what is at stake. Climate change threatens not only to disrupt an important industry, it threatens an identity and a way of life for countless athletes and communities, just as rising sea levels and warming oceans threaten Hawaii and Rhode Island. But above all, disappearing winters underscore the all-encompassing nature of our climate crisis. We are not just talking about conservation areas or habitats or wetlands or the fact that some of our mountains will simply, we are talking about the fact that some of our mountains will simply not have snow. Basic assumptions about our daily life and the things we feel passionate about in our physical surroundings will have to be reevaluated in light of climate change. We are focused on winter sports today because these athletes are among the first to experience the tangible impacts of climate change on their sports. But all athletes will eventually have to contend with the climate crisis. Extreme heat is already a significant concern for the organizers of the 2020 Summer Olympics and the 2022 Soccer World Cup. And rising temperatures are threatening the health of athletes at every level, from runners and tennis players to football and soccer players. The climate crisis isn't something we will experience in the distant future. It is happening as we speak, and the athletes here see it firsthand. But as temperatures rise and snow cover decreases, they've decided to fight. The enormity of this crisis presents an opportunity for us to broaden our coalition and envision a scenario in which everyone plays a role in climate action. This committee looks forward to hearing our witnesses firsthand and their insights into how the outdoor sports community can mobilize to demand climate action. I'd like to welcome Mike Richter, a Hall of Fame goaltender for the New York Rangers and the president of Bright Core Energy, Jeremy Jones, a professional snowboarder and the founder of Protect Our Winters, Carolyn Gleich, a professional ski, mountaineer, and adventurer who advocates for social and environmental causes, and Tommy Caldwell, a professional rock climber who has established some of the hardest routes in the country. Thank you all for taking the time to be here and share your testimony with us. We're looking forward to hearing your experiences and your views on how we can ensure your sports community can continue to thrive for generations. We'll begin by hearing our testimony from each of the witnesses, going down the line and starting with Mr. Richter.
Thank you, Senator Schatz, and the committee members for having us here today. I also want to thank you for your efforts on tackling climate change. This is huge for us. We rarely get this type of forum. My name is Mike Richter. As you said, I'm a retired professional athlete, three-time Olympian, and a father of three boys. And for the last decade, I'm the owner of a company focused on energy efficiency in the commercial building space. And you say, what does somebody who spent most of their life stopping hockey pucks have to do with the environment? And the world is really potential. It's what sports is about, reaching your potential. It's what college helps us to discover. And it's really what we try to fulfill every day in our professional and personal lives. And the fundamental connector between the environment and our potential is health. Someone once described me as a surprising environmentalist, and I'm sure they'd describe the rest of the panel here. And I really disagree. I think anybody who's alive has an interest in the air we breathe and the water we drink. Nike founder Phil Knight famously said, if you have a body, you're an athlete. But I would add, if you have a body, you're an environmentalist. Especially as an athlete, I came to appreciate that connection between the environment in which I live and the health that I have, and that health and my ability to perform at my maximum capacity. What I eat, drink, how I sleep, these profoundly affect how I'm going to perform. So climate change is that singular environmental issue that is negatively affecting the health of every single creature on this planet. I grew up in a small suburb outside of Philadelphia, and I was dreaming of playing the NHL as long as I could remember. And, artificial ice is very expensive and it's hard to come by. So even in that winter-challenged area of Philadelphia, when the duck ponds froze around my house, I'd be out there all day. My world would just stop. I'd stay there until it got dark. To skate outside is altogether different. It's magic. But natural ice is also a perfect metaphor for what's going on. Our disappearing winters serve as a canary in the coal mine for the health of our planet and our ability to reach that potential. As a player, I was honored to represent the most powerful nation on earth in 3 Olympic Games. But these days, the United States is really shrinking from that world stage and wasting the potential to lead others. Our unwillingness to be that leader does not make the problems go away. It just amplifies our vulnerability. As a father, I see 2 very unfortunate lessons being taught to the next generation that will only diminish our greatness. The first is social justice is tolerable. These burdens from climate change disproportionately affect the poor, women, and the young. No parent can look their child in the eye and explain this away. It's absolutely unfair. The second lesson is how we as a nation react to problems. America has always been accepting of these challenges that are presented. My father actually fought in World War II. Both parents lived through the Depression. But somehow our reaction to this crisis is that it's not happening, it's too expensive, it's too difficult. And that type of cowardice undermines every noble value upon which this country was founded, and we can and must do better. Finally, as an entrepreneur, I see missed opportunities. The cost of inaction is far greater than the price of the solution. The technical solves for this, for much of the issues, are already proven, off-the-shelf technologies. 100% clean energy legislation, it has a promise to create massive wealth. We could be the world leader in clean tech. And that doesn't just mean clean air, clean water, and safe, livable communities, but it's the opportunity to create millions of jobs. Today, I live in Southern Connecticut, and we probably see less natural ice than what I did in Philadelphia growing up 2 decades ago. And when I see a pond melt, I know the lost opportunity for this generation to experience the wonderful game that I was able to grow up with. But we need to understand that this represents something far more ominous. The world is different, the climate is warming, and these changes are negatively affecting every aspect of our life, from health, national security, social justice, and the economy. We're at a tipping point, and America is going to lead the way for better or for worse. Let's win back our credibility and leadership. Passing a clean economy bill will help enable individuals, our nation, and the entire world return to health and realize our highest capabilities. I thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jones.
Just honored to be here in front of you. You guys have shown great leadership on this subject. My name's Jeremy Jones. I grew up on Cape Cod, the highest point, 200 feet above sea level. So naturally, I am a professional snowboarder who has been around the world, and I make a lot of films. I've been in over 50 snowboard films, and my focus has been in going to places no one's been to, climbing up these dangerous places and snowboarding back down. So to do that and to still be alive today, I have a very intimate knowledge with snow, and I saw a change to that snow. And it coincided with what scientists were telling us. And naturally, it was heartbreaking. So in 2007, I started Protect Our Winters to unite the outdoor industry to act on climate. That came at the heels of, I was up in the northern latitudes at a ski area and was hiking this slope in the middle of February. It was grass, and I was with some locals who were in their 30s, and they were speaking of how they had this. This is where they grew up. They were showing me the jumps. They're now closed base lodge, and they, I was like, why isn't it open anymore? And they said it just doesn't snow here anymore. And this was back in 2005, actually, and I just knew that we needed to do something to come together to fight this issue. So what we're seeing today is the science confirms what I saw in 2007. It's getting worse than we thought. As this recent study by the EPA and University of Colorado shows that winter as we know it will be half in 2050. And by 2090, 80%, which means winter as we know it will be 3 weeks long. That is heartbreaking. I'm also a father. To think that my kids' kids could be the last generation of skiers is a big deal. And it's also really bad for business. The winter sports community represents $72 billion, 695,000 jobs, which I point out is 70,000 more jobs than the extraction industry. This is our coal mine. When the lifts don't open, we have food lines. The ripple effects. It's not just the ski instructors. It's not just the lift attendants. It goes all the way down the hill. But we realize that as bad as that is, and the thought of not having winter as we know it absolutely breaks my heart, we realize the global effects on the importance of snow for our water. California, 60% of its water comes from snowmelt. The Sierra is this perfect aquifer that is dangerous. So the alarms are everywhere. And the issue, sadly, I've never heard a scientist tell me the issue is not as bad as we thought, and it seems to be accelerating even more rapidly. This is the challenge of our time. We represent a huge audience, and they want action on this. This is traditionally an 18 to 35-year-old group that traditionally hasn't been active, and they really care about that, and we see that time and time again. And this generation that's coming up now, they are going to demand action on snow, but we are running out of time. The good news is the technology is there. And not only is the technology there, it's a jobs creator. So I think back to when I started Protect Our Winters and the fear that I had in that, and I wrote down on a piece of paper, together we can protect our winters. And that's really the key word. Thank you for your leadership, but we need the whole country, the whole world on this issue, and I firmly believe that together we can protect our winters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gleich.
I've always had a dream, excuse me, I've always had a dream of climbing and skiing the biggest mountains in the world. When I told people about my dreams, I was met with skepticism. You're too small and delicate. You don't have that look in your eyes of a mountaineer like Jeremy Jones does. They told me my dreams were impossible and either humored me or told me that I would die trying. I share this with you today because when we talk about big, ambitious climate goals, people say it's impossible. I'm here to say we can't listen to what anyone else says we are capable of when it comes to climbing mountains or acting on climate. I do what people tell me is impossible, and you can too. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Caroline Gleich, and I'm a professional ski mountaineer based in Park City, Utah. I built my career working as an ambassador for brands including Patagonia, New Belgium's Fat Tire, Gilbo, and Cliff Bar, among others. I grew up in Rochester, Minnesota, but after countless road trips to ski out west, hike, and climb and camp, I was hooked. When I was 15, my family made the move to Utah, and I moved closer to my passions, skiing and climbing. Having spent my lifetime exploring mountain environments, I've experienced how winters are warming and how snowpack is diminishing. As an alpinist, I spend a lot of my time climbing glaciers and ice. I've been on expeditions in the tent with the constant deafening sound of icefall around me. Increased temperatures are melting away both my sport and my livelihood. When on expeditions, I pay close attention to the conditions as our lives depend on it. We make observations and we report back with the critical information to make the best decisions possible. I'm here today to give you such a report and share that unfortunately, conditions are changing for the worse. Climate change is making climbing and ski mountaineering more dangerous. This spring, I went to Tibet, to the Himalayas, to attempt to climb Mount Everest, a lifelong goal that I've trained over a decade for. You probably saw the pictures of the crowds on Everest this year. What the headlines didn't mention is the role that climate change played. Research shows that as the Arctic warms, it creates a smaller temperature gradient that affects the jet stream, which normally creates a 7 to 10 day window for climbers to reach the summit. This year, the window was only 2 days long. With the congestion, by the end of the stretch, 11 climbers lost their lives. As climate change is having a multitude of other effects in addition to affecting the jet stream. We can no longer expect historic weather patterns to be indicators for future planning, especially in volatile alpine environments. In the Himalayas, the air temperatures have already risen by nearly 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the start of the 20th century. Permafrost is melting, as are the glaciers that provide reliable water sources for millions of people. In my role as an ambassador for Protect Our Winters, I have worked diligently to educate the outdoor recreation community on the systemic policy changes needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at scale. Now is the time to require polluters to pay for their emissions by setting an economy-wide price on carbon. This is a market-based solution that can garner bipartisan support. We must invest in a clean energy economy and move toward achieving net zero emissions by 2050, if not sooner. Now is the time to reduce emissions from our transportation sector by rapidly deploying zero-emission vehicles nationwide. And we have to protect public lands, our national treasures, from fossil fuel extraction. I understand we are in challenging times, and passage of such legislation can seem impossible. We have a president who repeatedly slashes climate progress. Those that desire climate action in the Senate are in the minority. It's daunting. Just 6 weeks before I headed to Tibet to climb Everest, I suffered a knee injury that resulted in a torn anterior cruciate ligament, my ACL. It's normally a season-ending injury. It was one of my worst fears realized, but I accepted my reality and figured out a path forward. I learned how to use my leg without an ACL, and on May 24th, I reached the highest point on earth. I chose to tell the story of perseverance and purpose. It's not how you get back knocked down, it's how you get back up. When we have setbacks, it's not a reason to give up. And saying we can't act on climate is insulting our human ingenuity. We have to be brave. The worst thing we can do is shrink in fear. I choose action over apathy. I choose to seek the impossible. We must do the same for our climate. We have a responsibility for future generations, for the children I dream of bringing into this world, to leave them a healthy, viable planet. I have no doubt, even when people tell us we're too small to make a difference, that we will persevere and reach our goals of achieving carbon neutrality and combating climate change.
Thank you very much. Mr. Caldwell.
Good morning, members of the Congress, or of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. My name is Tommy Caldwell, and I'm a professional rock climber from Estes Park, Colorado. I grew up near Rocky Mountain National Park with a mountain guide father who put me on the top of the mountains as a kid, even in the winter. I likely spent more nights under the stars than in a house as a child. and I climbed the Diamond on Long's Peak at age 12. In January 2015, I finished a climb on the Dawn Wall of El Capitan in Yosemite National Park with my climbing partner, Kevin Jorgensen. 8 years of failure led to an eventual 19-day successful ascent. Alpinist magazine called our feat the hardest big wall free climb in the world. The New York Times picked up our story halfway through our final ascent, and from there, the experience went viral, garnering 13 billion media impressions worldwide. I suddenly found myself giving TED Talks and going on the Ellen DeGeneres show, and even following Kanye West on stage at a Google event. That was certainly a trip. My life post-Dawnwall has been different. I'm constantly in the spotlight. A great mentor of mine once said, if you have the ability to do good and you do nothing, that's evil. That advice has stuck with me and ultimately brought me here today. It's clear that the apex issue of our time is climate change. Science tells us we have 11 years to act before we see the most catastrophic impacts. As a father, it's hard to fathom how unstable the future could become. When I reflect on the inaction of my generation and how it will negatively impact my own children, I have no choice but to get involved. There's a chance that our planet will see such turmoil that things like rock climbing will seem silly. We must turn our passion into purpose. We must shift the culture of the outdoor community so that climate advocacy is a given. As a lifelong adventurer and outdoorsman, I thought I knew what true wilderness was. Turns out, I was wrong. This past June, I had the opportunity to go to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge with fellow adventurers and trail runners Claire Gallagher and Luke Nelson, who are here today. Before this trip, several people had told me that the wilderness in the refuge was, quote, life-changing. I had my doubts. How was I going to be truly moved after having seen so much? Turns out, they were right. During our trip, we climbed the second highest mountain in the Brooks Range, slid down one of the fastest receding glaciers in the world, and eventually hiked out to the headwaters of the Okpilak River, where we pack rafted across the 1002 area, which is the area slated to be open to drilling. Another piece of advice I got before going to the refuge is that there, humans are not the top of the food chain. One day, we were tucked down in a hole, hiding from the wind by a river, when a wolf popped its head over the edge a few feet away. Claire instinctively grabbed her bear spray, Luke his camera. We braced for some kind of altercation, but the wolf showed no aggression or fear. The snout was stained red from blood, the coat was thick, and its eyes had a wildness that I had never seen. Its demeanor was only of curiosity, as if it had never encountered humans before and had no reason to be afraid. As we ventured out into the plains, we crossed the paths of thousands of caribou playing with their newly born babies. It occurred to me that maybe the value of the refuge lies in the fact that this place can be a reminder of what the world looked like before industrialization. In truth, we might have already lost our understanding of what true wilderness is. The Arctic is ground zero for climate change, as the temperatures have been rising at twice the rate of the rest of the country. It's not hard to observe the melting permafrost or the diminishing glaciers. Opening the refuge to oil and gas development would not only irreversibly destroy the largest national wildlife refuge in the country and deeply impact the outdoor enthusiasts who seek adventure and solitude there, but it would also add significantly to the climate crisis at a time in which it is imperative to curb our emissions and adopt clean energy. I believe the refuge should not be drilled and should be permanently protected, not only for the protection of wild America, but for indigenous rights and future generations. The extent of devastating climate impacts will be dictated by policy. We need systemic policy change to move us away from fossil fuel extraction and towards a carbon-neutral future. I largely attribute my success as a climber to the fact that my father taught me to embrace the fear and doubt and turn it into passion. I ask you to do the same. Let's let fear and doubt fuel creativity in solving the climate crisis. Thank you.
I don't think I've ever said this in a hearing like this, but great testimony. That was just really absolutely inspirational and on point and substantive. And not only that, but you all finished exactly on time, which is no small feat. I just have a basic question for all of you, and I'll start with Mr. Caldwell and go down the line. what's the sense among fellow climbers, fellow athletes? I mean, you're obviously on the leading edge of all this, and public opinion, just generally speaking, is changing. But it also seems to me that there's a resistance among athletes about politics generally. And so I'm just wondering how that sort of squares with your need to build a coalition, build momentum, when some of these, especially I think, snowboarders, climbers, others, can be loners, can sort of want to separate themselves from the government and cities and all the rest of it. So I'm just wondering how the sort of, if there's any culture clash or if that's over, what's the status of sort of your colleagues and where they view their obligation to get involved?
I mean, I would say historically climbers like to see themselves as kind of countercultural rebels. And so, yes, there's been clash in the past. But the culture is certainly changing thanks to, I think organizations like POW and Jeremy Jones. It's really creating a huge shift, and we see that really catching hold. I mean, I think my social media feed is kind of a good metric of this. When I used to post pictures of political events, nobody would engage or be excited about it. And now they get more engagement than even pictures of like my cute little daughter, for instance. But still not quite as much engagement as like sending the NAR and doing something really rad. So getting close.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think as outdoor recreation is becoming more mainstream and more Americans are participating in hiking and skiing and climbing and all these different sports, that they also see a need to use government as a tool for problem solving. And so I think that more athletes and more adventurers are getting excited about trading in their gear for some different attire and learning ways of navigating the political scene in their home governments and nationally.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Yeah. Sorry. For me, when I started Protect Our Winters, I had no idea that the front lines would be, here in Washington, D.C., but it just became clear that real action needs to happen at the policy level, at the federal level, at the international level. And at Protect Our Winters, we specifically, we've done a really good job of educating our audience that yes, this is where we need to win. So I think it's now these kids are coming up today that just understand that, that's where real action needs to happen.
Mr. Richter.
Well, my sport is from all over the world and increasingly from Europe, and the one commonality, so politically, they are all over the place. The one commonality is that free ice that you had as a child. That's true of outside of Moscow, Quebec City and Boston. And everybody feels it. If you see the NHL is going to this kind of retro look of the outdoor games, which has been wildly successful, and it's drawing on their experience as kids. That's not happening anymore, and people are starting to slowly make that connection. I would only say that the people who don't have a concern about this, they have a concern that the pond's melting, but they don't always make the connection. And it's just, as Jeremy said, education. As soon as they see the facts, the light bulb goes off. So we just need more education.
One quick, probably yes or no question. We'll start with Mr. Richter. Is the corporate community doing enough to engage? I mean, one of the things I just saw at the World Surf League event in Tahiti is they're wearing these fluorescent jerseys to raise awareness around coral reef bleaching. Sure. And so the reef fluoresces right before it dies. And they were all talking about it. And I thought that was a good platform to really convey what's happening to 4 or 5 million people who are watching this event. Are there similar partnerships, or do we still have some work to do?
Look, I'm conflicted on that because companies are in business to make money. And so unless the environment in which they're making that money gives them the direction, they're going to do what they need to do to make money. And that's a problem. I think they're doing an awful lot, and that's a good thing, but not enough. Clearly, we've got problems, and they're not solved. So I think this is one of those existential issues that requires all hands on deck, and that's government, and that's individuals, and that's the capital markets, and they have to work in unison. Right now, they're not, and people are profiting from not doing it.
So I can finish on time. Yes or no? Are they doing enough?
Getting better.
I mean, I know you all have sponsors, so there's that.
There's some brands like Patagonia that are real leaders, but there's others that really need to step up.
Yeah, I would say certainly not.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Well, here, Thank you so much, all of you, and I second Senator Schatz's comments. I'm trying to imagine anybody who would look any one of the four of you in the eye and trying to tell you that something can't be done. And it's really impressive. And I'm on my way of following all of you on social media. So, I come from a state that thinks of itself as the bold North, and I want to maybe start quickly with Ms. Gleich, because my fellow Minnesotan from Rochester, Minnesota, yesterday you stopped by my office and you used words that I hadn't ever really heard exactly before. You talked about how this is my livelihood, and you said a minute ago, this is, climate change is melting my livelihood. Could you talk a little bit more about what we can do better to help connect people to this idea that this isn't just about fun in the snow. This is about an economic imperative.
Yeah. Seeing the impacts in the Himalayas, I mean, it's hard to understand the impact that has for the millions of people who rely on the glaciers there for drinking water. I would say that there's also a really strong connection between public lands and climate change. And so a lot of the threats that are threatening our access to public lands are also climate related. And so making sure that we have a healthy and viable outdoor recreation industry. The other thing is in low snowfall years, that affects our agriculture because we don't have the stable snowfall, the melting, and it has just it affects kayakers, anglers, agriculture, all these other industries.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Richter, I know you're not from Minnesota, but I'm proud to have you featured in the Evelyn International Hockey Hall of Fame. So I'm grabbing to try to claim you one way or another. You said something that I think is something that I think a lot about and will often say to my friends in the business world, which is that when it comes to issues around climate change, the United States can lead or we can follow. And I think that we should lead. And would you just care to comment a little bit more about that? Because I think that that's really the question. Are we going to be following in this or let other countries take the lead, or are we going to
absolutely. And you can claim me. My wife's from Minneapolis.
That's what I heard.
It's like any problem. How do you deal with it as an athlete? How do you deal with it as a person, as a business person? Is an opportunity wrapped in that problem. And somebody will take the lead, and it's already starting to happen. Most of the solar panels that I see are manufactured in China.
Exactly.
Even if we allowed China to manufacture every widget that we need, we can put these people to work here. You're not exporting someone up on a roof screwing in a solar panel. There are so many jobs. There's so many opportunities. I see it every day. And the headwinds I'm fighting as a entrepreneur in the energy efficiency world are monumental. I can't hear one more time about the incentives that solar needs. Everybody gets incentives, and more so for the fossil fuel industry. So we can lead, and it starts with policy, but everybody has to understand how grave the situation is. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we're talking about snow and melting ponds can seem trivial from a distance, but I went back to school after my career, and it was only 10 or 15 years ago, we're talking about your grandkids are going to feel this effect. We are feeling this now, and what people have to understand is it's now, and it's every square inch of our life, from melting snow to the economy. So I think that's where the conversation has to shift, and yes, America has to lead. We can't follow on this one.
Yeah. I, too, get incredibly frustrated when I hear those arguing about how we should be letting the free market play out on this, and that subsidies to renewable energy sources are distorting the market. And then I think really my colleague, Senator Whitehouse, knows more about this than almost anybody I know about the massive subsidies that we give to the fossil fuel industry. So it seems just a tad hypocritical, seems to me. I'm just going to let my other colleagues ask questions. I want to thank you all so much for your comments here today. Thank you.
Senator Whitehouse.
Let me join our chairman in thanking you all for being here. This is really terrific. Mike, you brought back magical memories of my youth skiing on frozen ponds on black ice at night when you can see the stars and the moon reflected in the ice and you hear the cracks and booms of the, ice moving. It's pretty remarkable. Jeremy, thank you so much for being here. If coming from the heights of Cape Cod, perhaps you can come to Yagu Valley, Rhode Island, to test your courage against our steep drops. Caroline and I met in Utah. I do climate trips to states that have Republican senators to try to understand what's going on. I just got back from Wyoming, where I met with your amazing colleague, Lindsay Dyer. What you guys do is really incredible. And what you all do in terms of bringing the story back from the front. Because I will bet you that on the mountaintops, just like down on the reefs, the people who are there are not divided on partisan grounds. They all see the reef dying. They all see winter changing. And it's here in Washington where we have this artificial division around what, Tommy, you called our apex issue. I'm going to steal that line if you don't mind. That's a really great way to describe it. The thing that I want to bring up is that the fossil fuel industry is still firmly and remorselessly devoted to stopping action on climate change. They hide their hands very often. They will say things like, oh, we support prices on carbon, but then they deploy all their resources to make sure that the price on carbon that you mentioned, Caroline, that they claim to support never comes to pass. So they have denial groups that they fund, like the Competitive Enterprise Institute, so-called, and then they creep into existing trade associations and take them over. There are these bugs that put their larvae in other insects, and the larvae grow in the insect, and then pretty soon that insect is no longer the insect. It's like doing what the larvae inside it tell it. It's a really creepy thing. It happens in real life. And that's more or less what's happened to groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is no longer a U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It's a Chamber of Carbon, and I won't report where it gets its money from, because guess what? It probably gets all its money from the fossil fuel industry. So pushing back on that becomes really, really important. And you know, you've got a public platform to ask Amazon and Google why they support the Competitive Enterprise Institute. This is the group that put Myron Ebell into EPA to blow up legitimate climate efforts. And Amazon and Google are supporting them? That doesn't make any sense. Why are they there? Coke and Pepsi support the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Why are they there? It's now like game day. You know, now it's time to put the skis downhill and make this happen. And in order to do that, we're going to need companies like Amazon and Google and Coke and Pepsi, who claim to be our friends, to actually take sides. It's too late in the game to be on both sides, and it's definitely too late in the game to be on the wrong side and pretend to be on the right side. So we have a great common ability to have this be an accountability moment as well, and move this forward. Because in truth, the objection to, Caroline, the carbon pricing and so forth that you seek, it's not real. It's a manufactured product by the fossil fuel industry through phony front groups. We can knock it down, and with people like you, with your incredible voices, we will. So thank you so much for being here.
Senator Bennett.
Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for being here. Great testimony, Tommy. It's great to see you again in the state of Colorado. I listened to each of you talk in one way or another about the economic effects of climate change on your livelihood. And I continue to struggle with the fact that we elected a climate denier president of the United States, and he wasn't shy about it. He ran on it. And the basic proposition was, if we contend with climate, we will destroy our economy. If we ignore climate change, our economy will grow. That was the argument that he made, and that was an argument that he won. From the standpoint of our home state, that's a crazy argument. I mean, it is impossible to take the point of view that our economy will be better off if we ignore climate than if we actually deal with it. And also, as Mike said, actually look for the opportunities that are presented by that. I wonder if you guys, each of you or any of you that are interested in doing it, could use this opportunity to make the case from your perspective why the economics are so important of addressing climate change instead of ignoring it, and how we're going to do a better job to overcome this argument the next time we're presented with it in the coming election. I mean, we need your help, I guess, is part of it. And so grateful that you're here. We need your help to mobilize a generation of Americans who have grown up believing that democracy can't work and that because there's not a lot of evidence that it has worked in the time they've been on this planet, get them engaged to make sure that on this issue, which is the critical issue, the existential issue for them, that they see a path to be able to put their voices into this debate and make a difference in our political system. Because in the end, the only way we're going to make progress is by winning these elections and putting climate deniers out and putting people in office that are actually going to do what you need them to do and want them to do. Would anybody like to get us started?
I guess I'll just take that briefly, but it's, again, we know it employs, the solutions employ a lot of people and not acting on it. Again, we see the devastation across these outdoor communities. So it really, and we're seeing, I had someone tell me the other day, new Rockefellers are being created, and those are the people that are going all in on renewables. So it's obvious in all sectors. It's also gotten really hard. Why I said businesses are getting better in our outdoor community is the kids coming up today. Gone are the where they just look at a logo and go, oh, I like the logo, I'm going to buy that. They know what's behind that. They are, 4, 5, 6 clicks deep on that company's website going, what do they stand for? So this, the days of greenwashing are over in our outdoor industry, and which is why I do have hope that, and it's necessity. Again, we need change. I mean, these people stuck in the mud on the past, and whether that's in sport or in business, that never works.
I wanted to add to that, and I think a good way to approach it is as a public health issue. When I traveled to China this year, it's crazy when you go to a place where you can't safely drink the water. It makes you appreciate so much the Clean Water Act and our standards that we have in this country. And the thing about fighting climate change is it's also acting in the best interest of human health, to protect our water resources and to keep our air quality clean and breathable. And the other thing I wanted to share is in Utah, I've testified at a couple of federal EPA hearings about different initiatives that would affect the coal industry. And I've been able to meet some of the coal miners from Carbon County. And I spoke to 2 men at one of a hearing about the federal leasing process on BLM land. And they told me that they didn't really like their work in the coal mines and that they would like to get jobs installing solar panels. And they would do that tomorrow if they could. And so I think having compassion for people who would be affected in this change and really talking to people on the ground to see what they want and what the boots on the ground, supporting people through that transition.
I'll just add to that quickly. You have 4 athletes sitting here, and what we're talking about is competition. We're not changing the American way of life by evolving our economy. That is the American way of life. We've gone from wood to coal to oil to gas to hopefully solar or some kind of carbon-free technology. What we're doing is rigging the past to keep those incumbents alive. Yep. That's not the American way, and that's not competition, and that's, there's going to be winners and losers, and we just have to understand that. But that goes for nations as well, and so we got to get in front of this bus.
Just to underscore that point, Mike, to tie it back to what Senator Whitehouse was talking about, today it's as if the wood guys and the whale blubber guys are dominating this Congress and making it impossible for us to move on to what's next. And I really appreciate that perspective. Thank you.
Senator Heinrich.
I don't know where to start. This is a fantastic panel. My son should not be reading texts in class, but he's very excited that you're here, Mr. Caldwell. It's not every day that he's like, I'm jealous of your job. You guys have done an incredible job connecting a lot of the issues here that oftentimes get divorced from climate change. The real leadership in the business community and what we need to see there, our public lands, places like the Arctic Refuge. Let me start with you, Ms. Gleich. you're still based in Salt Lake City or in Utah?
Park City. Yes,
You know, I used to go to the Outdoor Retailer show when it was in Salt Lake City. It's not in Salt Lake City anymore, right?
yeah.
Why is that?
Because it's in Denver.
Well, the outdoor retailer show moved because the outdoor industry didn't feel that Utah was very proactively supporting public lands. Yeah.
Another way to
Bears ears.
say that is there was a leadership class within Utah that was actively hostile to public lands. And I used to guide in Utah, so I know this firsthand.
Yes.
When you guide in a place like San Juan County, Utah, you see very different worlds and very different people interacting with the economy in different ways. And the economic leadership decided that it just was incompatible anymore to support some of that hostility, whether it was lack of leadership on climate or on public lands directly, where many were espousing that we sell off, give away our public lands, which are an enormous economic engine. Mr. Richter, talk to me a little more about economic leadership, because we have this dichotomy right now where some of the usual suspects who purport to speak for all business are completely dominated by a few members and a certain point of view. And we should be seeking ways to incentivize the innovators, because so much of this is about incumbents versus innovators. And there are so many more jobs to be created by the innovators, by the disruptors. So how do we embrace and incentivize that voice within the business community, just to create at least a level playing field?
Yeah, I think that's the key is a level playing field. Efficiency in all its forms will always win, whether it's a business efficiency or efficiency getting down the hill fast. And we've put a monkey wrench in that entire thing by really rigging the system. And it's an incredible thing, this slow motion train, to being a follower in the world in the worst way, watching our country that has all the capacity. You have these Elon Musk popping up, and he can't, change as much as he wants to and as quick as he wants to because of the incumbents, frankly. And one thing that maybe needs to be discussed is this is not about sacrifice necessarily. We have to. There's going to be sacrifice necessary. There always is in challenges. But this is about a better life, a better way of transportation, better performing buildings, better air, better water. Everything about this says go forward, and we're choosing not to.
Our grandkids are going to look at the fact that we stood next to vehicles that belched out pollution and particulates and diesel smog and said, really? You guys did? It was really like that? And if we had, if we weren't in such a time crunch, we could afford to just let that efficiency drive the market. I mean, you see the cost of electricity that LA just secured that is so much lower than even natural gas, with storage, firmed up. But we don't have the time to lose this war of attrition on efficiency. We need to act now. And we're losing places like the Arctic Refuge. I mean, you have amazing, you have musk oxen that can't survive because now it rains in the wintertime on the ice. Mr. Caldwell, do you want to talk a little bit more about what's at stake in the places that we don't see every day, that you get a chance to see because of your skills?
Yeah, I mean, in climbing, we go to the high mountain environments, and these mountains that have historically been frozen together since the beginning of human history are thawing and falling apart and melting, and we see the glaciers turning black from particulate matter, which accelerates the melting. I mean, it's everywhere, even in our, in the main places I like to climb in the United States. I think got kicked out of Yosemite National Park because of smoke problems the last couple of years. I mean, big forest fires, as well as in my hometown. I built a house in Yosemite National Park, or right outside, and the community got completely burned around last year by the Ferguson fire, and then not too far before that, my house in Colorado got evacuated because of fires and big beetle. I mean, it's once you open your eyes to it, you see it absolutely everywhere. And then places like the Arctic, the permafrost is melting, which creates these big cracks, and then the rivers are sort of like, because the river bottoms are no longer frozen, the rivers are receding, the rivers are just kind of melting away and not even making it to the communities that rely on these places. So, yeah, it's everywhere.
Thank you all for raising your voices.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Thank you all. I agree with my colleagues. This is one of the best panels and the discussions that we've had, and I cannot think of better partners for us to amplify our voices on how to address and educate others on what's happening with respect to climate change. So I am from Nevada. Everything that every single one of you have said has impacted Nevada, and it is impacting all of our communities. And most people don't realize in Nevada, thanks to Lake Tahoe, we have some of the best skiing, I believe, snow skiing, snowboarding in the world. We have one of the largest freshwater lakes, Lake Tahoe, that we share with California. We have the beautiful Humboldt-Tyabe National Forest, the largest in the lower 48 states. We have the incredible pristine Ruby Mountains where they're trying to drill for oil and gas, and we've been able, with your support, to partner to stop, but they're still trying. And the other thing that we touched on with respect to climate change, I agree with everything you said. Outdoor recreation, it has been tremendous for Nevada, $12.6 billion in consumer spending, created jobs. But I think, Mr. Richter, you also touched on a subject, which is this. Besides the outdoor recreation, besides everything that we care about, it is having an impact on our health. And people don't realize that, right? Clean air, fresh water to drink, some of our communities that are struggling, communities of color, they don't get the benefit of that always. And they don't even get the benefit of participating in outdoor recreation unless we introduce it to them and bring them out there. The other thing that I don't know, unless you're from a Western state, people don't realize is we're in a drought mode, right? The snowmelt from the Rocky Mountains is key to Colorado and the water that we have for all of our states. It's similar to California, Nevada, up in northern Nevada. These are all issues that we are dealing with. So I guess my question to you, because you have just talked about it, you've nailed it, but how do you guys are doing your part, what should we be doing to work with you to educate more, to talk about this, to amplify this to so many people? As you can see, we are struggling because we have partners here in the United States Senate who do not even believe this is happening. And even if they are, they're not willing to be voices to stand up against it. What we need is to reach more people to be partners with us that are demanding it and demanding it from those elected leaders. What more can we be doing? From your perspective, what else should we be doing? I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts. Mm-hmm.
It's a huge privilege to be able to do what we do, and we approach this testimony from a place of immense privilege to be able to do these sports, to have the resources, the time, the money, and the fitness, and all these different things. And I think that with climate change, like Mike said, it disproportionately affects women and people of color and minorities. And just like with I think like in order to create a healthy outdoor recreation industry going forward, that we need to do more with our industry to embrace diversity and to show that in films and to show that in magazines and other places. And just like the same way we embrace diversity there, we need to be reaching out and telling other people's stories as well, because other people around the world that are affected by, around the U.S. and around the world, that are affected much more significantly by climate change, that don't have places to live, for instance, because their houses are flooded. We need to tell those stories and reach out. And we also need to embrace more diversity in our energy portfolios.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else?
I would just say one thing. I mean, I think this issue, I hear it echoed so many times that this is a political issue. By definition, it is absolutely not a political issue. It hits old, young, male, female, whatever. Everybody's affected by this. It's an equal opportunity tragedy. So I think the more we can underscore that, I've never met anybody okay with the flooding that's happened. I've never met anybody, rich or poor, that's okay with the heat waves and the fires and everything else. So as we can get away from that, I'm not accusing you of doing that. It has become politicized in terms of its solution.
No, that's fair. I agree.
But that bothers me to no end because it is suddenly then it's someone else's problem because it's political.
Yeah, no, but I think you touched on it. I think what the conversation should be, and this is what I have around my state with everyone, right, is what are you seeing and how can we address it together? But it also starts with accepting the science that really is telling us what is going on and then how we can work together to move forward. And I think that's the piece of it. That's where we start. And that's what I'm asking is what more can we do to bring that discussion into our communities to really focus on what we are seeing before us and how we work together. I'll be honest with you, there are parts of my community that just will not go down that path because they don't trust the federal government or they don't trust what's being said. And I think we need to get beyond that and really have conversations. I believe you can help us with that. The other piece of this is the new technology that's out there, and I'm going to be running out of time, but you are on the forefront of utilizing that new technology. And you touched on it, Mrs. Gleich. I think the idea of electric vehicles, electric buses, I think what we can do is invest in that infrastructure to help it grow. It is a part of reducing that carbon footprint. And we can get away from the politics of it and say, here's what's improving our communities, and at the same time, it is having a positive impact. One final thing, I'm running out of time, but I am going to steal this from you because you said this in your remarks, and it's absolutely accurate, which is the cost of inaction is far greater than the cost of the solution. To me, that is what people should be hearing. So thank you all. So appreciate it.
If there are no further questions from members, we really want to thank the testifiers who are powerful advocates for our collective vision for climate action. Let this be the beginning of a conversation in terms of how we can all work together. We'll keep the record open for the next following days in case you would like to submit any follow-on testimony and in case any members want to submit questions to you for the record. With that, this hearing is adjourned.